Those who work for a president or in a specific presidential administration know the first and unbreakable ground rule. You stand behind your president at all costs and every turn. So why then are more than 50 people in the State Department going against their elected leader over the issue of Syria? Now, speaking of leaders and those who believe they will be in power soon, Donald Trump and his followers can shake their fist and be as angry as they like, but they need to stop blaming the messenger. His poll numbers are historically disastrous right now, to the point where experts believe Hillary can do almost no wrong. What's to make anyone believe he can recover? And speaking of the Democratic challenger, she's now in charge of the DNC and has to bring her party together. Why should anybody believe she can bring Bernie Sanders into line before or even after Philadelphia? We kick to the weekend with all this and cannot do it without your phone calls at 1-877-NEWSMAX. Get in the queue right now and be prepared to stake your verbal claim. I'm Ed Berliner. This is The Hardline for Friday, June 17th, 2016.
The genocide is ongoing. From the day of the attack on Sinjar until today, ISIS has permanently sought to erase the Yazidis through killing, sexual slavery, enslavement, torture, inhuman and degrading treatment and forcible transfer, causing serious bodily and mental harm.
Far too often, we hear real experts, so-called experts, and those who simply are paid to spout certain agenda-driven opinions, rattle off numbers that are supposed to impress us and perhaps change our minds. Though we all know they rarely change the thinking process of those entrenched in their specific beliefs. We're bombarded with numbers that are not always factual, not always recordable, and far too often leave plenty of wiggle room which allows those on every side of the argument to claim a win. We're not going there right now, so be prepared to ingest some numbers you will find uncomfortable, hopefully shocking, and maybe even repulsive. 470,000, close to 500,000 people that have died, often brutally. A life expectancy that has dropped from living to an average age of 70 instead of what it used to be. That's 14 years from the only life these people will ever have. 7.5 million, the number of children that have seen their lives change forever, losing any chance of a real and memorable childhood. More than 2 million of those uprooted, forced to flee their homes, many living now in squalid, festering refugee camps, where the only toys they have to play with are broken sticks and the rocks they sleep on. 6.5 million people wandering within their own country, seeking to find a place, any place, where they won't be shot on sight or bombed into pieces. 3 million of whom have been forced to leave their homeland and hope for a place where they can find a bed, much less forge a new life. All numbers from the 4-year-old Syrian civil war. A war that people believe America needs to bring its power to bear and save a country. A genocide that has reached a point where even those who are there to support the President of the United States can no longer remain silent as to what we should be doing. Listen closely. Your phone calls will be part of this conversation at 1-877-NEWSMAX, 1-877-639-7629. Get in line and be prepared. She is the veteran of national security law under former U.S. Attorney General John Ashcroft, now legal analyst at the Clarion Project, Jennier Breedon. Jennifer, thanks so much for joining us. It's a difficult topic that we begin with here this evening. But this has got everybody inside the Beltway talking now. Dozens of American officials at the State Department, 51 of them, are basically going against the President of the United States. They are calling for military action against Syria's Bashar al-Assad. How unthinkable is this in many ways when you consider that the people that are supposed to be behind the president are saying, you got it wrong and we've got to stop, because those numbers that Ed Berliner just mentioned, they're not going to get any better by themselves.
No, and it's unthinkable because really we have an international legal duty to prevent and protect genocide that is occurring, no matter where it is and no matter to whom against or where the targets are of these genocidal campaigns. And that is happening. Not only has the European Union stated that, but so has the United States and now the United Nations. And as of 2005, the World Summit Responsibility to Protect, we do have an international legal duty to stop that genocide in its tracks.
Now, talk to us about that legal duty here, because much of it is involved in various treaties that are signed. And as a matter of fact, I should point out that your article coming out this weekend called "This is Genocide: How We Can Win the War Against ISIS and Why We Continue to Fail." Now, this is not ISIS we're talking about. This is Syria that we're talking about. But we are still talking about what you discuss here is the European Union, the United States, the UN Human Rights Commission, all are guarantors and supposed to be fighting against genocide, yet we do not, and we don't seem to get the help from other countries as well.
Exactly. And yes, my article does discuss ISIS specifically. Now, the diplomats that came out with the State Department memorandum discuss Syria, so where President Bashar al-Assad has mutilated and murdered over 250,000 of his own people. I mean, this is also a genocide. This has definitely been labeled as such. And so when you talk about discussing the legal ramifications of this, in 1948, we came up, the United Nations and the member states codified this as the prevention and punishment of the crime of genocide. And in 2005, after the failures of Rwanda and many other genocidal campaigns, the member states came together at the United Nations to frame what's called the responsibility to protect. It was the World Summit outcome, and it outlined and mandated that when a genocide is occurring, when member states acknowledge that a genocide is occurring, there is a legal duty under the United Nations mandates and international law for those states that have recognized that genocide to stop the genocide in its tracks using collective security measures. And so that's really the international law, regardless of the treaties. That's kind of been the law in place as the precedent for this.
What about our legalese here in the United States? Because we all know, supposedly, that a president cannot just simply go, we're going to war, that's it, boom, send out the troops and we're all taken care of. That's why we have a Congress here. So legally speaking, when there are people who say, Mr. Obama, you have got to get into Syria because we're the only people who can save these people's lives, what's the legalese involved?
Well, and some people might be saying, you know, well, since we haven't really declared where Congress is supposed to declare war under the Constitution, they have not done that since World War II. And so since then, we've had many different kinds of legal avenues to do that. After 9/11, we authorized the authorization for the use of military force. And that's kind of been our legal backbone to fight terrorism, because this was a non-state actor. And at the time, Osama bin Laden and the Taliban, they were kind of unknown. We weren't really sure how to kind of go after that. But this is Syria. This is a state sponsor now of genocide who is mutilating their own people. And this is really the crux of the definition of it. And so, you know, Congress has the duty to declare war. And regardless of, you know, whatever political ramifications might be happening, because this is an election year, this is something that we do have to reconsider and have to start talking about seriously. Speaking
of talking about, 1-877-NEWSMAX. 1-877-NEWSMAX. If you want to join us here, should we be sending our troops and the full weight of the American military right now into Syria? Everybody who's viewing us right now heard those numbers that I was talking about a few moments ago. 500,000 people are dead. 6 million people are wandering around the world right now because one individual has decided to cause a little genocide on his own people. That's one of the things we want to hear from you at 1-877-NEWSMAX. Let's also look at something else legalese here on the international scene, Jennifer. Paul Ryan has said something that many people did not really catch when he first came out. They were going, did he just say that? And he did. He said that if Donald Trump wants to create a ban on Muslim immigration into the United States, he calls that executive overreach, and said, I will, quote unquote, sue any president that exceeds his or her powers. Does he have the right to do that?
He does have the right to do that, as does technically any U.S. citizen. There is the term of sovereign immunity under international or under the U.S. laws and domestic laws. But, you know, what we're talking about here is executive overreach, and the president is supposed to be a civilian. He's supposed to be the highest civilian, the commander-in-chief of the United States of America. And so if the president violates the law, we have set in place under the separation of powers, the checks and balances system of our United States Constitution, in which this democracy depends on. We have set in place numerous laws and agendas that allow not only Congress, but, you know, the United States citizens, which Congress is the voice of, to ensure that that president answers for his illegal actions.
I want to talk about something else here very briefly, a couple of minutes that we have, and this comes down to legalese as well. I want to spin to, and a lot of this comes down to as well Muslim immigration and what we have talked about here in Orlando, the killings that went on this past last week, the 49 people that are dead. The federal government has now put the shooter, Omar Mateen, his father and his wife on no-fly lists at this point. That's new. But here's the wife sitting here, whom, if I'm not mistaken, various stories that we've heard said she took him by the club, that she took him to buy guns. There are people who seem to believe that she knew what was going on, that she don't. Can you try and shake this down for us a little bit here? I mean, is she right now, in your opinion, legally sitting there as a potential combatant, if you will, somebody that has to be indicted?
Yes, and what they're looking at right now is the term accessory. Were you complicit? Were you an accessory in this? Did you either help knowingly carry this out, or did you know that this was going to happen to a reasonable degree of certainty and allow it to happen anyway without warning any sort of authorities? And I think they're having pretty good evidence on that, not just recovering the cell phone where she was texting her husband after 2 a.m. while he was in the club murdering people, and she claims to have been awakened by his mother who called, which is just is kind of ridiculous, to be honest with you. And so this is a wife, and then the father here, who's a supporter of the Taliban, a known supporter of the Taliban, who's shown no real remorse that his son has been killed or for anything that happened in Orlando. And you have to remember that this is a guy who pledged allegiance to an organization whose extremist ideology actually says that if you die as a martyr, taking out infidels, murdering others, if you die as a martyr, then 70 of your family members will be able to join you in heaven. And so there is a very real possibility that his family members, namely his wife and his father, knew it was going to happen and allowed it to happen because, according to whatever their extremist ideology is of this actual fact, that they allowed it to happen, that they're happy about it, and that they'll now end up in paradise with him.
1 minute we have left here. Let's get a couple of phone calls in here very quickly. Suzanne from Pennsylvania, you have 30 seconds, Suzanne, on why we need to help Syria. Go ahead. Suzanne, can you hear me? Suzanne cannot. Rich in White Plains, New York. Rich, you have 30 seconds on why we should not take out Assad.
Well, Ed, thank you for taking my call again. And we took out Saddam Hussein in Iraq. We took out Gaddafi in Libya. We took out Mubarak in Egypt. And what did that do? That left a void of leadership and just opened it up to ISIS to come in.
And that is the biggest concern here. Rich, thanks a lot for the call. 20 seconds, Jennifer. Isn't that the thing we have to be careful of? You go and you want to be sure you don't break it and you can't fix it again.
Yes, we do want to be sure of that. I think one of the mistakes that even military commanders have said is that when we went into those places, we actually didn't have any sort of a plan for allowing them to establish a centralized government or for maintaining what they've known in their countries. So that's something looking forward that we need to do and not do what we did in Libya and Iraq, which is go in there, take them out, and then have no plan of action for allowing them to recover their stabilized government.
Learn from our mistakes. What a novel idea. Jennifer Breedon, thanks so much for joining us. We do appreciate your time. History's already come to bear in this presidential election, but one candidate facing a stonewall of electable proportions America has never seen in its lifetime. Stay with us. Your calls and more when the Hardline continues.